This is a special edition Post-Orthodoxy. I'm going to pull the video up.
View the event.
We're going to let people
why are we here?
Filter in for a moment before we start talking about the
my hair. Because of this light behind me,
you
can see like every single frizz of my... No, it makes us look horrible. I've done rigorous studio testing to get us to this place with this.
So we're on?
Oh, and my...
What?
The little words at the bottom of the screen are black when they should be white.
Here, fishy, fishy, fishy?
No, the title of the video.
Oh.
This is why I'm really looking forward to our studio. Where
Hey.
Everything's set up in advance. Oh my gosh, it's going to be great. I'm going to share this with our foreign correspondent, Christian Beschloff.
Yeah, if he's awake.
In Germany.
Yeah.
I don't know what time it is in Germany right now. And I'm going to share with our foreign correspondent, Astrid Selling, because she is often awake.
Yes. Okay. So thanks, if you're watching us right now, thanks for watching us.
Yeah. I think you're the only one that's joined on right now. It's kind of a weird time of day.
It is a weird time of day. It doesn't matter. It's important just to get this crap out and start doing it. Just to get it out.
You could say we're doing product testing for which times of day people like to watch live videos.
Right. I'm going to mute this. Mute site.
Yeah, mute that.
Okay. Welcome to a special edition of Post-Orthodoxy. We decided this is our day off. Tuesday is usually our day off, where we don't do any of this business. But last night, friend of the show, Kevy Keene, on our Sunday show, posted a link to a video that was 49 minutes long. And
Thank you, Kevy.
Didn't want to watch a 49-minute long video until yesterday when I had the time to do it. So I did watch the video.
And then we watched it again this morning.
She didn't get a chance to watch it yesterday, so we both watched it again this morning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the video that we'd like to talk about today. It feels like a lot of the subject matter that Post-Orthodoxy has been diving into since the pandemic was declared in March. A lot of the subject matter that we're dealing with, we are finding referenced in this video, names that we have referenced, concerns that we have brought up.
Data that we've referenced.
Right. So, the contents of this video, do you have a copy of the video somewhere?
Yeah, I'll share it to everybody. This video came out October 3rd.
Yeah, so it's old news already.
And we found this thanks to Kevy in our last show this Sunday on, I guess, the 10th or 11th.
Okay.
When we were talking about how the WHO had just reversed they just made it very clear that lockdowns are only meant to be for a short period of time so as not to overwhelm healthcare systems, and that they should not be a long-term thing because the cost-benefit ratio is atrocious.
Right, the WHO was saying that they expect global poverty to double in the next year, and global childhood malnutrition to double in the next year, and they are attributing that to the lockdown measures, long-term effects of what was supposed to be a short-term measure that has turned into a long-term measure.
So this video came out and it's got over 1 million views now, and when I was searching for the original of this video, I actually found many repeater stations. Tons of different people have reshared this video. And this video is coming from an apolitical perspective. It's a lawyer or Dr. Rainer Fulmich, who is a legal lawyer, I think, in Germany, but he's working with a bunch of scientists, doctors, and lawyers and attorneys on basically starting some massive class action lawsuits against the governments and people in power who have enforced these lockdowns for the past 10 months. Because of all of the loss that we've experienced. Overdose deaths, suicide deaths, business loss, education loss, mental health crashes, people who suffered abuse from people that they couldn't get away from because of the lockdowns. And so I'm looking forward to more information about the class action lawsuit. But basically, we're talking about this video. There's a tiny slice of the pie where it's really, really sweet to find out you've been on the right path.
It appears that we have not we were banned from the radio station for sharing the material that we're sharing. It's nice to see the material that we were sharing now bolstered by international organizations of lawyers and doctors.
We haven't been sharing fake news.
No, we haven't been
sharing a lot of data and our perceptions of that data, and we always made it clear which thing was the data and which thing was our opinion. And it's turning out that the perspectives we were acquiring about the data we were looking at seem to be on the right track of perspectives.
Right. So Ainsley just shared the video onto our Facebook page, and I am going to share another link from some cat that feels like the guy in the video left out some important parts of the video.
Yeah, he's like, this guy's right, and also he's missing a bunch of things.
He's missing a bunch of things. So
There's
I'll get in. So I found this other cat who's talking about the video. Has a transcription of this 49-minute video. So if you don't want to read the video and you just want to scroll down and find the hot topics, you can find them and decide for yourself what's going on here. I found this other transcript because I was looking for something that was debunking this video. The claims made in this video are going to be apocalyptic for people who are invested in the mainstream corporate news politicized version of this pandemic crisis that we are in. So it's going to be apocalyptic because...
Apocalypse is like a revealing that is often shocking. Etymologically, an apocalypse is finding something out that is shocking or destabilizing.
If you are invested in an illusion and the illusion falls, that will be an apocalypse for you. If an illusion falls but you weren't invested in it, the apocalypse will be less.
Yes.
So for some people, this will be apocalyptic.
And many people will just lower the battle walls and double down on the way that they think it's been since March.
I can see some of our friends of the show already bashing us in comments without hearing anything else. Cannot look. All right, so I'm going to read a few things. The video is available. The transcript is available.
It has to be a pandemic because Trump is evil.
I'm going to read from the transcript of this lawyer. What's the lawyer's name? Dr.
Rainer Füllmich.
Füllmich, yes. He is in the Bar Association in Germany and in the United States. So I'm going to start with this heading. The main point that we're talking about is the PCR test. All our friends that I see online every day saying, oh my God, 500 more positive cases in Montana.
Which we don't even get into the testing failures most of the time because that's a lot of research for people to have to do.
Right.
What I usually say when I see someone saying there are 500 more cases is how many of those people are sick? Mm-hmm. Because having viral presence in your body is not the same thing as being ill.
That's true. There's also there's a piece that I would like to share before I go to this article. It's a very brief piece that I shared on the Post-Orthodoxy Facebook page. If you haven't liked or followed the Post-Orthodoxy Facebook page, I invite you to. Mm-hmm. This is where we start building resources that we've been researching before we do our show, so that way you can be involved in the dialogue.
We share a lot of resources on
You
that
can
page.
be hip to the scene before we get into it. So, there's an article from the Toronto Sun that I shared this morning. So that's like a regular old mainstream newspaper. The Toronto Sun, and from the article, the name of the article is Let's Put These COVID-19 Numbers into Perspective. And the one quote that I wanted to read is, the media blare out the fact that new cases are up 25% from the height of the pandemic.
As in more new cases now than there were in March.
Right. But they ignore the fact that testing is up 800%. This is a lie by omission, it's alarmism, and it should be ignored. So the emerging data is that the PCR test is completely bunk.
It's not even emerging. We did a show on how PCR tests are bunk in August,
Well,
based almost entirely on the CDC's pamphlets about the PCR
Yeah.
test, which say that it is not designed to be used as a diagnosis. It says it on the box, and the CDC's information also says that the PCR test that they recommend for this pandemic does not discern between SARS-CoV-2 or influenza A and B.
right, so I'm going to read this section from the video. I
Diverging.
recommend watching the entire video, and if you don't want to watch the video, you can read the entire transcription. So I'm going to start here.
Get some popcorn.
This is from the subheading, claims that lockdowns were needed, simply not justified. The assertion that the lockdown was necessary because there were so many different infections with SARS-CoV-2 and because the healthcare systems would be overwhelmed is wrong for 3 reasons. As we have learned from the hearings we conducted with the Corona Committee, this is a German organization, and from other data that has become available in the meantime. The 3 points. A, the lockdown was imposed when the virus was already retreating. By the time the lockdown was imposed, the alleged infection rates were already dropping again. 2, or B, there's already protection from the virus because of cross or T-cell immunity. Apart from the above-mentioned lockdown being imposed when the infection rates were already dropping, there is also cross or T-cell immunity in the general population against the coronaviruses contained in every flu or influenza wave.
So that's something that doesn't get talked about very
The
much.
T-cell immunity is emerging data.
Is that, and I hope you don't mind if I interject just a little bit. This is not the first coronavirus. There are lots and lots of coronaviruses. The first SARS outbreak, which was far more deadly by the numbers than this SARS outbreak, was also a coronavirus, and the swine flu was a coronavirus. And the coronaviruses mutate so quickly that we cannot create a vaccine for them, which is why there has never been a vaccine for the common cold.
Right.
Because rhinoviruses and coronaviruses, the primary causes of the common cold,
and flu, yeah.
Some mutate so quickly. The flu is primarily caused by influenza A and B, which we have been able to develop some rolling vaccines for, even though it mutates a lot slower than coronaviruses.
Okay.
So when they're saying like, it's a novel virus, we can't know, we actually can know lots of stuff about this virus.
Right.
Because it's extremely similar to all the previous coronaviruses on the planet.
So they're saying there's cross or T-cell immunity in the general population against coronaviruses contained in every flu or influenza wave. This is true if this time around a slightly different strain of the coronavirus was at work. And that is because the body's own immune system remembers every virus it has ever battled in the past, and from this experience, it also recognizes a supposedly new but still similar strain of the virus from the corona family. Incidentally, that's how the PCR test for the detection of an infection was invented by now famous Professor Drustin.
Now infamous.
Now infamous Professor Drustin.
Here's how he invented it.
This is the heart of the issue right here.
This should be destabilizing, but it doesn't have to be paralyzing.
At the beginning of January 2020, based on this very basic knowledge, Mr. Drustin developed his PCR test, which supposedly detects an infection with SARS-CoV-2 without ever having seen the real Wuhan virus from China.
So the guy that invented the test that the CDC is using to test millions of global citizens didn't ever have his hands on
the virus
that this test is supposedly testing for.
At the beginning of I'll do it again. At the beginning of January 2020, based on the very basic knowledge, Mr. Drustin developed his PCR test, which supposedly detects an infection with SARS-CoV-2 without ever having seen the real Wuhan virus from China, only having learned from social media reports that there was something going on in Wuhan. He started tinkering on his computer with what would become his Corona PCR test. For this, he used an old SARS virus, hoping it would be sufficiently similar to the allegedly new strain of the coronavirus found in Wuhan. Then he sent the result of his computer tinkering to China to determine whether the victims of the alleged new coronavirus tested positive, and they did.
Now, I want to be transparent because I was just saying, everybody's like, it's a novel virus, we can't know. And I was like, what we can know a lot of things about it because of past viruses. Mm-hmm. And this guy built a test based on his modeling of past viruses.
Yes.
So I want to be clear that I'm aware that I said both of those things at the same time.
Yes.
This is not the only thing that makes PCR tests scary.
So the PCR test is not from the Wuhan virus. He decided because the people who had the Wuhan virus tested positive, that was good enough to test the rest of the world for the virus.
They tested positive for something.
That was enough. Now back to the article. That was enough for the World Health Organization to sound the pandemic alarm and to recommend the worldwide use of the Drusten PCR test for the detection of infections with the virus now called SARS-CoV-2. Drusten's opinion and advice was, this must be emphasized once again, the only source for the German government when it announced the lockdown, as well as the rules for social distancing and the mandatory wearing of masks. And, this must also be emphasized once again, Germany apparently became the center of especially massive lobbying by the pharmaceutical and tech industry because the world, with reference to the allegedly disciplined Germans, would do as the Germans do in order to survive the pandemic. C, and this is the most important part of our fact-finding, the PCR test is being used on the basis of false statements, not based on scientific facts with respect to infections. In the meantime, we have learned that these PCR tests, contrary to the assertions of Messrs. Drusten, Wieler, and the WHO, do not give any indication of an infection with any virus, let alone an infection with SARS-CoV-2.
Whoa. I think you're going to have to read that one for me again.
In the meantime, we have learned that these PCR tests, contrary to the assertions of the authorities in Germany, the guy who invented it, and the WHO, do not give any indication of an infection with any virus.
Right.
Let alone an infection with SARS-CoV-2.
So they're finding positive results of things.
But no indication of an actual infection.
Right.
And we go further.
We're going to define what an actual infection is further on.
Not only are PCR tests expressly not approved for diagnostic purposes, as is correctly noted on the leaflets coming with the tests.
This is not approved for diagnostic purposes. Stick it in both your nostrils.
And, as the inventor of the PCR test, Carrie Mullis, has repeatedly emphasized.
The original
guy who
inventor,
invented the test.
Back in like the 70s?
He invented
80s?
it in the 80s, and it is the test that we talked about on a previous show that was how they connected HIV with AIDS.
That was what made this test,
it's another story.
Which he said
it's on our podcast,
is not designed to diagnose illnesses,
so,
was also incorrectly used to give the public the perspective that HIV was also a global health crisis.
Right. Instead, they're simply incapable of diagnosing any disease.
Okay.
The PCR test is incapable of diagnosing any disease.
So what the heck was this test originally? I'm just going to look at it.
Hold on. That is contrary to the assertions of Drusten, Wieler, and the WHO, which they have been making since the proclamation of the pandemic. A positive PCR test result does not mean that an infection is present. If someone tests positive, it does not mean that they're infected with anything, let alone with the contagious SARS-CoV-2 virus.
So, to phrase that another way, you can have a positive PCR test just because you have dead pieces of things floating in your immune system that are not a positive infection, not an ongoing infection, and not a transmissible infection.
Right. So, even the United States CDC, you've heard of the Center for Disease Control, even this institution agrees with this. And I quote directly from page 38 of one of its publications on the coronavirus and the PCR test. This is dated July 13th, 2020.
Okay.
First bullet point says, Detection of viral RNA may not indicate the presence of infectious virus or that 2019 nCoV novel coronavirus is the causative agent for clinical symptoms. Second bullet point says, the performance of this test has not been established for monitoring treatment of 2019 nCoV infection. And the third bullet point says, this test cannot rule out diseases caused by other bacterial or viral pathogens. It is still not clear.
Which the CDC says on its website, which we talked about in our show on August 8th. We said the CDC says on its website, in the pamphlet, this test can't tell the difference between SARS-CoV-2 and influenza A and B.
We were banned after that show.
Not the August 8th show.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we were banned after the August 30th show.
Right. It is still not clear whether there has ever been a scientifically correct isolation of the Wuhan virus, so that nobody knows exactly what we're looking for when we test.
So, like, labs everywhere have Ebola, and they can study Ebola.
Yeah.
But they don't have
the Wuhan virus.
SARS-CoV-2.
Right. Especially since this virus, just like the flu, viruses mutates quickly. The PCR swabs take one or two sequences of a molecule that are invisible to the human eye and therefore need to be amplified.
Here's another reason that you should be destabilized, but you don't have to be paralyzed.
We talked about this several weeks ago in the Post-Orthodoxy show when we were still allowed on the radio before the censorship. We talked about a New York Times article that was dealing with this specifically. And I quote again, the PCR swabs take one or two sequences of a molecule that are invisible to the human eye and therefore need to be amplified in many cycles to make it visible. This is what the PCR test does. Everything over 35 cycles, and I'll clarify a little bit. When they say cycle, they're taking this piece of a molecule, and each cycle has an exponential doubling.
Like zooming in on a school microscope,
yes.
Like zooming in, zooming in, zooming in.
It has an exponential doubling of information. So when you say 35 cycles, that means the information has been exponentially doubled 35 times. So everything over 35 cycles is, as reported by the New York Times and others, considered completely unreliable and scientifically unjustifiable.
So standard practice is, don't you cycle this test more than 35, or you're going to be like an OCD housewife finding dirt where there isn't any dirt.
However, the Drustin test, as well as the WHO recommended test that followed his example, are set to 45 cycles. That is 10 times doubled exponentially 10 more times than what is saying is where it becomes worthless.
It's not just 10 more times, it's to the power of 10.
To the power of 10, yes.
People are dying because this test says people all over the planet are infected with this virus, and I'm not talking about the supposedly 1,009,000 people who have died of SARS-CoV-2. I'm talking about the suicides and the abuse victims and the overdoses and the hunger and the homeless and the poverty.
Yes. Can that be because the desire to produce as many positive results as possible and thereby provide the basis for the false assumption that a large number of infections have been detected? The test cannot distinguish inactive and reproductive matter. That means a positive test result may happen because the test detects, for example, a piece of debris, a fragment of a molecule, which may signal nothing else than the immune system of the person tested won a battle with a common cold in the past.
You can have leftover pieces of viral and bacterial material in your body from previous illnesses that are not an active infection and not something you could transmit to anybody else, but the PCR test will pick that up as if you are actively ill.
Here's where it gets evil, I'm afraid. Mr. Drustin, this is the guy who made the test.
Who did a computer model based off of previous coronaviruses without any access to the actual SARS-CoV-2 virus that now the entire planet is using.
So now you're going to get a perspective from the doctor that he's talking about. You're going to hear
Durston's perspective.
Durston's perspective 12 years ago on the PCR test, and his perspective now And apparently he and his business partners are invested in the sales of this test. So let's see what happens here. Even Dursten himself declared in an interview with a German business magazine in 2014, at that time, concerning the alleged detection of an infection with the MERS virus, allegedly with the help of the PCR test. He said that these PCR tests are so highly sensitive that even very healthy and non-infectious people may test positive. At that time, he also became very much aware of the powerful role of a panic and fear-mongering media, as you see at the end of the following quote. He said then, in this interview, quote, "If, for example, such a pathogen scurries over the nasal mucosa of a nurse for a day or so without her getting sick or noticing anything, then she's suddenly a MERS case. This could also explain the explosion of case numbers in Saudi Arabia. In addition, the media there have made this into an incredible sensation." End quote. Has he forgotten this, or is he deliberately concealing this in the corona context because the corona is a very lucrative business opportunity for the pharmaceutical industry as a whole? And for Mr. Alfred Lund, his co-author in many studies and also a PCR test producer, in my view, it is completely implausible that he forgot in 2020 what he knew about the PCR test and told a business magazine in 2014. In short, this test cannot detect any infection, contrary to all false claims stating that it can. An infection, a so-called hot infection, requires that the virus, or rather fragment of a molecule which may be a virus, is not just found somewhere, for example, in the throat of a person without causing any damage. That would be a cold infection. Rather, a hot infection requires that the virus penetrates into the cells, replicates there, and causes symptoms such as headache or sore throat. Only then is a person really infected in the sense of a hot infection, because only then is a person contagious, that is, able to infect others. Until then, it is completely harmless for both the host and all other people that the host comes into contact with. Once again, this means that positive test results, contrary to all other claims by Dursten, Wheeler, or the WHO, mean nothing with respect to infections, and as even the CDC knows, as quoted above. Meanwhile, a number of highly respected scientists worldwide assume there has never been a corona pandemic, but only a PCR test pandemic. This is the conclusion reached by many German scientists such as Professor Bakti, Reis, Molling, Holkerts, Wallach, and many others, including the above-mentioned Professor John Ioannidis and Nobel laureate Professor Michael Levitt, friend of the show, from Stanford University.
We're a friend of him. I don't know. I wanted to be a friend of the show someday.
The most recent such opinion is that the aforementioned Dr. Mike Yeadon, a former vice president and chief science officer at Pfizer, this is a major pharmaceutical company, who held his position for 16 years, he and his co-authors, all well-known scientists, published a scientific paper in September of 2020. And he wrote a corresponding magazine article on September 20, 2020. Among other things, he and they state, and I quote, we're basing our government policy, our economic policy, and the policy of restricting fundamental rights, presumably on completely wrong data and assumptions about the coronavirus. If it weren't for the test results that are constantly reported in the media, the pandemic would be over because nothing really happened. Of course, there are some serious individual cases of the illness, but there are also some in every flu epidemic. This was a real wave of disease in March and April, but since then, everything has gone back to normal. Only positive results rise and sink wildly again and again, depending on how many tests are carried out. But the real cases of illnesses are over. There can be no talk of a second wave. The allegedly new strain of the coronavirus is only new, and that it is a new type of the long-known coronavirus. There are at least 4 coronaviruses that are endemic and cause some of the common colds we experience, especially in winter. They all have striking sequence similarity to the coronavirus, and because the human immune system recognizes the similarity to the virus that has now allegedly been a newly discovered, a T-cell immunity has long existed in this respect. 30%,
that's the herd immunity thing.
30% of the population had this before the allegedly new virus even appeared. Therefore, it's sufficient for the so-called herd immunity that 15 to 25% of the population are infected with the allegedly new coronavirus to stop the further spread of the virus, and this has long been the case. Regarding, and this is back to Dr. Fulmich, regarding the all-important PCR test, Yaden writes in a piece called Lies, Damned Lies, and Health Statistics, The Deadly Danger of False Positives, dated September 20, 2020, and I quote, "The likelihood of an apparently positive case being a false positive is between 89 to 94%. Dr. Yaden, in agreement with the professors Immunology Camara from Germany, Capel from the Netherlands, and Cahill from Ireland, as well as the microbiologist Dr. R. from Austria, all of whom testified before the German Corona Committee, explicitly points out that a positive test does not mean that an intact virus has been found. The authors explain that when the PCR test actually measures is, and I quote, simply the presence of partial RNA sequences present in the intact virus, which could be a piece of a dead virus, which cannot make the subject sick, and cannot be transmitted, and cannot make anyone else sick. I think that's enough. If you want to know more, you could know more.
Some of our viewers on Twitch, Simulacromancer and Mercurius RX, Simulacromancer shared a JAMA article, Journal of American Medical Associations. It's an article, and I think he gave us his guest access key, because you can't read all of them, but you can read all this article. COVID-19 and excess all-cause mortality in the U.S. and 18 comparison countries. And so it's going to take some time to read through, but it is a JAMA article talking about excess deaths. These things are always so tiring because you have to read what their results were and then read their method for acquiring those results.
Right.
For instance,
we do,
and this is much better than a New York Times article or a CNN article or a Fox, obviously, article. And so I'm going to have to take some time off camera to read this and look at their methodology for how they're calculating these numbers. A lot of people don't know the difference between death rate and death count. Montana has had 209 COVID deaths total.
For the entire population of the state.
Yeah, we have...
Which works out to 0.02% of the population of Montana has died from coronavirus.
Yeah. Now, when you say over 1 million people on the planet have died, that seems really sucky. That's the entire population of Honolulu, the island, or Oahu, is that the... Yeah, Oahu, that's the entire population of Montana. But when you compare that with the entire population of the globe, it's a 0.01 death rate. And a lot of people will share death rates with you that are a death rate of how many infections there were compared to how many deaths there were.
And the problem with that,
which is different, it gives you a much bigger percentage than how many people out of how many people on the planet have died. So I want to look into this article. The other article that Simulacromancer shared is from the Annals of Internal Medicine, and this is variations in false negative rates of the RT-PCR test by time since exposure, which it seems that what they're talking about is use clinical factors to determine whether the person is still infectious or not. So if you've got a person in the hospital and they want to go back to work, even if the test says they're clear, also look at whether they're snotty and tired.
Right.
It seems to be what this article is saying. But so anyway, I'm going to read those. And then Kevy also shared an article with us from Extreme Tech. that says, how deadly is COVID-19? New Stanford study raises as many questions as it answers, so I'm looking forward to reading those. We asked you guys to share articles and sources with us, and I appreciate it. And I really hope that you'll take some time to read, to watch this 40-minute video, or read the article that we've shared that lists all of the sources that this guy is using, and basically says he doesn't even cover enough of the corruption and lies that are going on the planet right now. Not because we're trying to have a gotcha moment, not because we're trying to see we were right all along. We're sharing this data and hoping that you'll read it and watch it, because we're concerned about the massive level of global suffering going on, and that we feel very strongly that if there was not a faulty test at the heart of the infection rates, we would not still be experiencing global economic and poverty crises and mental health crises, and you know, like all the things being caused by these lockdowns.
So one thing I want to read from the bottom of this transcript of the video by Fulmick is part of the motivation why we did this video today. I'm going to read the last 3 paragraphs of the transcript, and then in the last paragraph is the reason why we did this. So Dr. Fulmick says, however, through an international lawyers network, which is growing larger by the day, a German group of attorneys provides to all of their colleagues in all other countries, free of charge, all relevant information, including expert opinions, testimonies of experts showing that the PCR test cannot detect infections. And they also provide them with all relevant information as to how they can prepare and bundle the claims for damages. The point of this video is a class action lawsuit for crimes against humanity, because the PCR test was foisted upon us, and the people who did it knew that it cannot detect infections. So when they're saying X amount of people died out of the infections, that infection number means nothing. The infection number, I'm not talking about people who got sick in the hospital, I'm talking about positive tests. It means nothing. So these scandalous corona facts, gathered mostly by the Corona Committee and summarized above, are the very same facts that will soon be proven to be true either in one court of law or in many courts of law all over the world. These are facts that will pull the masks off the faces of all those responsible for these crimes. To the politicians, and I'm going to say this is to all our friends.
Okay, we have a lot of friends who are in politics and a lot of friends who are avid social justice warriors.
Yes.
And I don't mean that in a derogatory way.
No.
I mean, we know a lot of people who really fucking care about taking care of the planet. We still have a little bit of a heart attack every time we swear.
Yeah.
We're on the radio, we can swear. But this is like a chance. This is a moment. This is a kairos.
This is the kairos.
This is the, if you're waiting for the opportune moment, as Jack Sparrow would say, this is it.
This is the opportune moment.
This is when you could know things that we didn't know before, that everybody will soon know, and then they'll look back on the people who refused to know it and think things about them.
So this is to the politicians who believe those corrupt people. These facts are hereby offered as a lifeline that can help you readjust your course of action and start the long overdue public scientific discussion, and not to go down with those charlatans and criminals.
You don't have to be a charlatan and criminal.
So there are people who are repeater stations, repeating the lies of the WHO and the pharmaceutical industry and the creator of the PCR test. We know that these are lies. We know that the test doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And any test numbers are bunk now, because we know that we were lied to about the effectiveness of the test. If you are still thinking that the lockdown measures and the testing mean something, this is your opportunity to find out that it doesn't. And we've provided the links to that information, and we are looking for anybody who can tell us how this information is incorrect.
And
show us that the PCR test is valid, and that the testing numbers that is in the Montana Standard every day mean anything. Show us that the PCR test means something as far as telling who's infected with the virus.
And
I can't find it.
These articles that Simulacromancer shared, the one about excess deaths, as well as the article about PCR testing. I'm looking forward to reading those. We said please share, and you shared, and we're going to read them. Simulacromancer says the JAMA article is adjusted per capita. Check out the ACP article looking at sensitivity and specifically false negatives and positives. No test is perfect, but imperfection is not the evidence of the scandal. I hope you don't get lost in the rabbit hole. Look at excess deaths. That's where the rubber really meets the road. Be well. And I think that's a really good point.
Yes, look at excess deaths.
I think there has been, it's quite possible there has been some excess death. This is my predictive model based on the last 8 months of study. There probably has been some excess death this summer as compared to previous summers. However, I predict for my model of study that the excess deaths this summer will not exceed what would normally happen during a bad flu season in the winter.
That is the assertion of this lawyer and the coronavirus panel in Germany.
That there have been some excess deaths.
No, they're saying there have been no excess deaths. Basically.
Really?
Yes, that's the assumption, and that's what I'm saying, is like, it depends on how you look at the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So which science, will the real science please stand up?
And we're really going to have to dig into this guy's evaluation of the video because he has links to data.
There's something else I want to read.
Okay, let me, Gabriel Vazicic says, great stream. We'll check out the video later. Thank you for bravely having all these discussions. Science is about pursuing all the information and testing hypotheses. Too much science these days stops short of asking the next question in order to shape things to preconditioned agendas. Feynman would be proud. You know who Feynman is?
Yeah, Feynman.
Feynman?
Yeah. I'm going to read, I was reading the transcript off because I was looking for somebody who could debunk this video.
Yeah, as soon as we find something that feels this good, this is how we check our confirmation bias. As soon as we find something that feels this good to watch, we're like, okay,
let's find the bullshit.
Let's go find who's disagreeing with them.
Right. I haven't found anybody disagreeing.
Yeah.
Nobody, this video has been out since the 3rd. It's claiming that the WHO is a lie. It's claiming the PCR test is a lie. It's claiming that the pandemic is not a pandemic.
You remember how fast Facebook and YouTube shut down that video of the doctors talking about hydroxychloroquine?
24
hours.
It was
fucking gone.
Right.
No one could find it anywhere. I had friends sending me links from the deep web of you had to like click several pages to get to the video about the doctors talking about hydroxychloroquine. This video has been out since the 3rd. It's been out for 10 days. There's nothing online about anything that he's saying being wrong.
I would say I have not been able to find anything online.
Okay, that's true. That's a better statement. We haven't been able to find anything,
If
and we've
you
been looking.
can, if you can find something online that says that this is not true or false information, please let us know. I was looking for somebody to debunk this. I found a blog by a guy named Sanjeev Sablok, who declares that he, it says in the Who Am I category of his blog, it says public servant forever, which you said is public enemy number 1 right now.
No. Public servant forever is like the modern day version of a vigilante.
A vigilante.
He's doing vigilantism
because he's a public servant.
As in because he used to have a really important job and he left it to do what he feels like is the right thing to do, just like a vigilante would, except without superhero skills.
So this is an Indian cat, and this is when I was looking for somebody to debunk Rainer Fulmich's video. This is the title that came up. Rainer Fulmich's video about COVID crimes against humanity. He's on the right track, but he's missed out many things. So I'm going to read his intro.
But wait, there's more.
Yeah, I'm going to read his intro to this video because this adds more information on top of the inflammatory condition that is the 49-minute video. So this is Sanjeev saying, I've been trying to figure out what this video says. Luckily, someone has made a full transcript. I've now had the time to make annotations in color and added some text in blue, including some comments and subheadings. So he's made subheadings for you to go find the PCR section and so on and so forth.
Really visually appealing.
My view, I think Fulmich is broadly on the right track, but he has missed many key facts. Number 1, WHO has strongly opposed contact tracing and therefore mass testing in its October 2019 guidelines for flu-like pandemics. Therefore, no mass testing should be undertaken under any circumstances. The fact that PCR tests are bogus is a secondary issue. A focus on PCR tests is not warranted to drive the legal case. Even if they were accurate, lockdowns would never be justified. Number 2, the WHO has strong opposed lockdowns in its October 2019 guidelines for flu-like pandemics, and all science has rejected this idea before Wuhan lockdowns. Therefore, the lockdowns are a human experiment and require ethics approval. The entirely and comprehensively breach of the Nuremberg Code. Lockdowns are a crime against humanity. Number 3, lockdowns are not quarantine, therefore are not protected under any public health laws. Number 4.
Because quarantine is a real thing.
That's a real thing.
It's a real thing. If you suddenly have Ebola and they're like, oh my God, you have Ebola, you need to be quarantined. That's very different than wear a mask to get into the bar to get your beer and sit down and talk with your friends who don't live with you without a mask on while you drink your beer.
Lockdowns, number 4, lockdowns and mandatory mask mandates outdoors breach all legal requirements of proportionality. I've discussed those matters in my book and article linked here. This is there's a link to his blog, which you can find. We already posted a link to this guy's page in our comment section. In brief, this episode is a criminal episode on an unprecedented scale. Millions of government functionaries need to be tried by the International Criminal Court. This is not just about civil class action. So what both these cats are saying, if you are in the public sphere, if you are, let's say, running for city council, and new information has come out that says your long-standing perspective that the virus is spreading wildly according to the PCR test, and you find out that the PCR test is bunk and therefore the numbers have no meaning, then to be a good public servant, you should say, there's new information, I've adjusted my position, we need to look at this differently. Our friends in this town, if they see this information, have two choices. Double down on the lies, because these are lies. The PCR test is a lie. You double down on the lies and you continue to put people at danger.
Mm-hmm.
Or you look at the new information and you adjust your story and you become a part of the wave of justice that keeps this pharmaceutical medical tyranny from coming and using us all as corporate livestock to sell us things we don't need. You have kind of those two choices. So also, Butte America Foundation and KBMF also has a choice to apologize for saying that we were a danger to the community when ironically they're going along with the corporate news media lies has been putting our community in danger. We were one of the few voices on that station to say we should be questioning the city.
We should be questioning the
state,
city. We should be
federal, WHO information on this virus. We've been saying you should question it. They fired us for questioning it.
We said you should question it. We should be questioning this because people are dying. We should be questioning this because people are suffering. We should be questioning this because children couldn't pick up a lunch at the Butte Silver Bow school system during the lockdown without an adult going with them. Do you have an abusive parent? Do you have an abusive spouse? Do you have unemployment? Do you have a job that you can do from home? There's a new privilege out there, folks, and it's called pandemic privilege. And if you're not living at home with an abusive spouse, and if you are free to travel and your social circle won't reject you and shame you for traveling right now, if you have the ability to pay your bills and keep your home and buy food, you have pandemic privilege. And there are millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of citizens that do not have those privileges and are suffering and will continue to suffer long-term effects. And I'm just so glad it's a census year because we're going to be able to see how much suffering has been caused by these lockdowns really fucking fast.
Yep.
We're going to see next year how many people died from suicide and overdose and how many people called mental health hotlines more than any other year previous because of these lockdowns.
There's more information in this video that describes how we heard the story about what was happening, let's say in New York. the epicenter that traumatized so much of the country thinking that this virus was going to kill us all. There is information about how that occurred, and it's in this video. You can find it. I'm not going to read the entire video for you. If you want to know what's going on in the current state of this virus with new information, you could know. And if this information is incorrect, please let us know. Because we are not invested in a narrative. We are invested in trying to understand what is happening to our community and to the mental health of our friends who are shaming us right now. We're concerned about them.
I'm concerned about the mental health of my friends who have been suffering the lockdowns.
Yes.
I used to run a kid co-hosted talk radio show on KBMF, which was the only children's programming in Butte. And the only children's programming that gave kids a voice in Butte on any platform in the entire town. And that show got canceled because people at the Butte America Foundation and KBMF don't like people questioning mainstream Democrat narratives.
So just so you know, we did go to the Butte America Foundation meeting to ask them for the membership list. I'm going to get into a little wonkiness real quick. We were fired from the KBMF radio station illegally. The Butte America board broke FCC law in their endorsement of limiting content, and the station manager limited our content and then gagged us from telling our audience that our content was limited around this issue specifically. So I would like to say that this information, I forgot where I was going with this. We're putting up our GoFundMe page because we did go to the Butte America Foundation meeting. The only recourse we have left with this public Butte America Foundation, which is meant to be a social justice, workers' rights, and I think the lockdowns goes into the workers' rights.
Social justice, workers' rights, and education.
That's what the Butte America Foundation is supposed to do.
That's how they raise money from you guys.
They have not responded to any of our letters to them. As members of the organization, they have ignored us. In this last meeting, they ignored us. And in that meeting, they discussed contacting the GoFundMe page to say that we were fraudulent for raising money.
To say that we were defaming them by pointing out how they broke their own bylaws and FCC law.
So
which they could have just said, actually, guys, we didn't break our own laws, and here you can see it. But they can't because they did.
So we do have a Post-Orthodoxy live stream studio fundraiser going on still on GoFundMe. If you would like to support this kind of journalism, this kind of infotainment.
And in full transparency,
edutainment.
If you're saying, but you just said you're not making money off of talking about this stuff, and here you are with the GoFundMe, let me show you how those two paradoxes can exist at the same time.
Show us.
I'm doing massive amounts of research every day to build this studio, which we are going to provide for a very, very discounted price, as well as my production and mixing services to other people in this town who need a voice, who do not have a platform on which they can have a voice right now. A free expression platform for Butte that KBMF said that they were going to be.
They're compromised
are now no longer a free expression platform in Butte.
Nope.
And we know KBMF is not a First Amendment rights organization. They're not required to abide by First Amendment rights. Neither is Facebook. Any of those platforms that you agree to use can decide to limit your content, but Banff did it illegally. They could have decided to tell us to stop talking about SARS-CoV-2 legally by following their rules. Us asking for money to buy literal equipment to go in a room downstairs is the bare bones. It does not cover our time researching. It does not cover our time researching to produce these shows. It does not cover our time doing these shows, and it does not cover any overhead. It is not a wage. You are helping us with money to buy equipment so that our stream doesn't look like the piece of shit that it is today. It looks like a piece of shit.
I want to say thank you to everybody who has been funding. The support has been heartwarming. It's the only thing that's kept us from just saying maybe we should just give up.
And we have a lot of anonymous donors who are donating to us and telling us they are not going to donate to KBMF anymore, and that is not the result that we want. We do not want you to stop donating to KBMF. We want you to balls up and cause a revolution in this fucking town. This town needs a fucking revolution. The children are fucking dying and nobody's doing anything about it right now. And I want you to go to the board meetings and be mad.
Butte America Foundation and KBMF need to be held accountable for their illegal activities and for their censoring us so that our radio audience cannot be privy to the information that you are privy to right now. That organization is important to this town and they need to be held accountable. people. There needs to be phone calls to the station manager. There needs to be visits. There needs to be letters to the board saying that this should be a free speech platform. If you're going to limit the content, do it legally. Otherwise, we should have our jobs back, and Suzanne Stefanik should resign from the board president, because this is malfeasance at a very high level and a dangerous level.
You've got to get mad. I'm going to share my favorite speech from the network. That's a great movie to watch right now. If you're curious about what's going on with KBMF and BAMF, you've got to get mad. This is an excellent video. I hope it pumps you up. I hope that you get frustrated. I hope you don't just cover your ass in town by not alienating people. We're alienating a lot of people, and it hurts and it sucks. It's fucking shitty, but it's because we feel like the things that we're talking about are really important and because we care about you guys. I hope that some of the people who have told us that they're just going to stop donating to KBMF will balls up and get mad and go to the board meetings.
Hold them accountable.
And hold them accountable to the community that has funded them for the last 7 years. And
all that.
I'm freaking out. Anyway, we had about 12 people there for a little while, plus
nice.
the people listening.
We've got the information out there. Thanks for dropping in. We had to get this off our chest. We're going to be doing a more comprehensive show on Sunday at least, and we're going to go through the information that we've acquired between now and then.
Thank you for sharing your articles with us. You can always find us on Post-Orthodoxy on Facebook and send us more articles.
You can like and follow the Post-Orthodoxy Facebook page and see all the updates in this important story as we are finding new information. And again, if you have any information that debunks this crimes against humanity video, please share it with us.
Yes.
Because I might just be in such a Google bubble.
Oh, such a bubble.
That they refuse to give me the data that contradicts this video.
That's why I like
Maybe you have data that contradicts this video and we would like to see it.
I like to go to a Google Chrome incognito video, so they're not tracking your cookies. And then I go to DuckDuckGo, which also says it's not tracking your cookies. And then I Google things. And then I like specifically click on things that have come out in the last month.
Yeah.
And that's how I try to find like the most up-to-date shit. Gabriel Vazicek says, shake my head. Local radio is a priceless treasure, but once individuals try to lock down on the community of airwaves, well, let's just say I can empathize with your plight. I have donated to them in the past, but they will get no more of my support unless they do the right work. Smiley face.
Yeah, you guys should be doing the right work. If you're the gatekeeper for a non-commercial, community-oriented media organization
founded on social justice, education, and workers' rights,
you need to brush up. You need to make sure that you're doing the right thing and not just succumbing to panic, fear, and hysteria, which is what has happened at the Butte America Foundation and what has happened at the KBMF radio. They succumb to panic, and they're endangering the public by doing so. Unless you can show me this information is incorrect, that assertion is true.
Show us where the tests are actually accurate.
Yeah, is the PCR test accurate? Show us how it works. Show us how it's accurate. Show us any kind of valid science that shows that the PCR test produces a positive test, which means that somebody is infected and can spread it.
Watch this video that we shared, if you dare.
Yeah, we're done. I think we're getting repetitive.
I think we're getting crazy.
Thanks for tuning in, folks.
We really appreciate you
Share
guys.
this video around. Share it to your folks in the Butte America Foundation and KBMF.
Share the YouTube video of this German scientist and lawyer who's getting a coalition together to sue the fucking planet for all of the damages caused by lockdown.